Champion Vextorthur once believed that 300,000 credits of warforged armor made him untouchable. That belief lasted exactly 0.7 seconds after a human placed her hand on his chest and tapped. Not struck. Not slammed. Not even pushed. I know how that sounds. I know what you are thinking, because I thought the same thing when I first replayed the footage. Equipment failure. Faulty calibration. Some hidden weapon or energy discharge the sensors missed. That is what any rational being would assume. That is what I assumed, right up until I reviewed the data logs for the 14th time and realized that nothing had malfunctioned. Everything had worked perfectly. Which was the problem? My name is Vexer of the Kryn, champion ranked, decorated across 17 campaigns, and at the time of this incident, widely considered one of the most capable close-quarters combat specialists assigned to Station Helios 9. I had faced plasma bombardments, gravity distortions, and once, an entire boarding party of Targoyans in a corridor barely wide enough for two of them to stand side by side. I survived all of it without a single catastrophic equipment failure, until a human instructor decided to demonstrate proper technique. If you are waiting for the part where I tell you I saw it coming, where instinct warned me, where some ancient warrior sense whispered that I was about to make a terrible mistake, I regret to inform you that no such moment existed. There was no intuition, no flicker of doubt, no hesitation. There was only confidence. Absolute, unshakable confidence. In hindsight, that was my first mistake. The second mistake was laughing. Not a polite chuckle or a restrained expression of disbelief. No, I laughed openly, fully, the kind of laugh that carries across a room and tells everyone present that you have already decided how this encounter will end. I remember the way my mandibles clicked with amusement, the way a few of the other trainees shifted as if embarrassed for the human standing in front of me. She did not react. That should have bothered me more than it did. The third mistake, though I did not realize it at the time, was agreeing to the demonstration. First contact wins, she had said, her voice calm in a way that suggested either supreme confidence or complete ignorance. I assumed it was the latter. I assumed many things about humans in those days. Small assumptions. Harmless assumptions. Every single one of them was wrong. I remember thinking that I would end it quickly. Not out of cruelty, but efficiency. A controlled advance, a measured strike, enough force to prove a point without causing injury. There is a certain professionalism expected of a warrior of my standing, after all. One does not brutalize an instructor, even an unqualified one. I approached at approximately 60% speed. That detail is important. 60%. My armor registered every step, every shift in balance, every calculated vector of motion. The targeting systems highlighted her as a non-threat, a minimal resistance variable, something to be corrected rather than confronted. Even the predictive algorithms suggested a resolution time of under 2 seconds. They were optimistic. She moved. That is the simplest way I can describe it, though the word feels insufficient. Movement implies effort, intention, a visible transition from one position to another. What she did was something else entirely. One moment she occupied the space directly in front of me, the next she did not. No acceleration curve. No preparatory motion. Just absence. And then her hand was there. Open. Relaxed. Almost casual. My sensors recorded the contact pressure. 12 pounds per square inch. For context, that is less force than is required to secure a standard equipment latch. It is the kind of pressure you might use to steady yourself against a wall. It was not, under any known combat doctrine, enough force to do anything. Then my armor ceased to function as armor. There is a very specific sound that high-grade composite plating makes when it fails under stress. It is sharp, violent, accompanied by a cascade of warning alerts and structural integrity alarms. I have heard it before on battlefields, in the aftermath of heavy impacts. This was not that sound. This was quieter, cleaner. Like something had reached into the structure itself and simply asked it to stop. The chest plate separated first. Not cracked. Not shattered. Separated. The bonds holding the material together disengaged in a way that my systems could not categorize. The failure propagated outward in a perfect, expanding pattern, each layer of protection disengaging with mathematical precision. No heat signature. No energy spike. No identifiable cause. Just absence of cohesion. I remember the smell next. Burnt circuitry and ionized air, a faint metallic tang that had no right to exist given the lack of thermal output. My internal displays flickered, struggled, then died entirely, leaving me in a silence that was somehow louder than any battlefield. Pieces of my armor fell away. One by one. Expensive pieces. Irreplaceable pieces. 300,000 credits reduced to debris by something my systems had classified as negligible. I staggered back, not from impact, but from the sudden realization that I no longer understood the rules of the universe I had spent my entire life mastering. My body moved out of reflex, creating distance, searching for a threat it could not identify. She was still standing there, in the same position, hand lowered now, expression thoughtful, as if she were reviewing the outcome of a routine exercise. "Oh," she said almost conversationally. "Sorry. I think I misjudged that." Misjudged. The word echoed in my mind with a kind of distant, surreal clarity. Around us, the training facility had gone completely silent. Not the usual lull between exercises, not the focused quiet of observation. This was different. This was the silence of a room full of witnesses who had just watched something impossible and were collectively deciding whether reality itself had malfunctioned. I looked down. Through the gap where my chest plate had been, I could see my scales. Intact. Unharmed. My underlayer uniform, undamaged. Whatever had happened had affected the armor and nothing else. That was when the first crack appeared in my confidence. Not a complete collapse. Not yet. Just a small, almost imperceptible fracture. Because if she could do that to the armor without touching me, what exactly had been holding her back? I opened my mouth to ask the question, but no sound came out. For the first time in a very long career, I found myself without a prepared response, without a tactical assessment, without even a coherent thought to anchor myself to. She tilted her head slightly, studying me with an expression that I would later come to recognize as curiosity rather than concern. "Do you want to continue?" she asked. Continue. As if what had just happened was a normal, expected part of training. As if the destruction of high-grade combat armor with a casual touch was something that could be followed up with additional instruction. My mind struggled to catch up. Somewhere, deep beneath the shock, beneath the confusion, beneath the growing awareness that I had made a significant error in judgment, a single thought began to form. Slow, heavy, unavoidable. I had underestimated her. Not by a small margin. Not by a factor of 2 or 3. By an amount so vast that the concept of measurement itself became meaningless. And the worst part, the part that would come back to haunt me in the hours and days that followed, was not the destruction of my armor, or the loss of resources, or even the damage to my reputation. It was the realization that she had not even been trying. I would understand that later. At that moment, standing in the wreckage of what had once been my greatest advantage, I only knew one thing with absolute certainty. This was not going to end the way I had planned. And for the first time since I had stepped onto Station Helios 9, I began to suspect that I was not the one in control of how it ended. I should explain something about the Kryn before you continue judging my decisions too harshly. Pride, for us, is not a flaw. It is a foundation. From the moment we are capable of standing, we are taught that combat is not simply a skill, but an identity. Our history is written in campaigns, our traditions forged in battlefields, our greatest heroes remembered not for what they built, but for what they survived. Other species develop culture around art, philosophy, diplomacy. We develop it around victory. For over 6,000 cycles, the Kryn have served as the Galactic Council's foremost warriors. When conflicts escalate beyond negotiation, when diplomacy fails and someone must step forward to end the matter decisively, it is almost always a Kryn who answers that call. Not because we are the only ones capable, but because we are the ones who never hesitate. I had never hesitated. 17 campaigns across 12 star systems. 347 confirmed victories in sanctioned single combat. Decorations that marked not just survival, but excellence. I had trained under masters whose names were spoken with reverence, warriors who had held lines against impossible odds and lived to tell the story. I was not average. Even among my own kind, I was exceptional. That matters, because it explains why what happened next was not immediate surrender, not a request for transfer, not even the sensible decision to step back and reassess. It explains why, as I stood there surrounded by the remains of my armor, I did not walk away. Instead, I tried to understand. The training facility slowly came back to life around me. Conversations resumed in hushed tones, the kind of careful, measured whispers that suggest a shared uncertainty about whether what just occurred should be acknowledged openly. A few trainees shifted their positions, creating space as if proximity itself might somehow make them vulnerable to whatever had just happened. The human, Lieutenant Iris Calloway, though I had not yet committed her name to memory, remained where she was, entirely at ease in a situation that had fundamentally destabilized everyone else in the room. That, more than anything, unsettled me. I have seen warriors after victory. There is always a reaction. Adrenaline, satisfaction, even restraint carries a certain tension, a readiness for what comes next. She displayed none of it. No heightened breathing, no shift in posture, no sign that she had just performed something that should have been impossible. It was, to her, unremarkable. That thought settled into my mind with a weight I could not ignore. Unremarkable. Your armor, she said after a moment, glancing at the scattered fragments with mild interest. Was it custom calibrated? The question was so ordinary, so completely disconnected from the magnitude of what had just occurred, that it took me a second to process it. Yes, I managed finally. Kryn engineering. Third-generation plating. Redundant systems. She nodded slightly, as if confirming a detail in a report. Good to know, she replied. Good to know. I stared at her, trying to reconcile the casual tone with the reality in front of me. Around us, a few of the more technically inclined trainees had begun to move closer, their curiosity overcoming their hesitation. I recognized one of them, a pill technician named Kilnera, her multiple eyes already scanning the debris with an intensity that suggested she had found something far more interesting than a routine training session. This doesn't make sense, she murmured, more to herself than to anyone else. The structural failure pattern is wrong. I seized on that. Of course it was wrong. That was the explanation. The flaw. A hidden defect in the armor's construction, some rare but not impossible failure that had manifested at exactly the wrong moment. It was not the human. It could not be the human. There were limits, physical laws, constraints that governed combat. There had to be. Analyze it, I said, my voice regaining some of its authority as I turned toward Kilnera. There must have been a fault in the plating. She did not respond immediately, her attention focused entirely on a fragment of the chest plate she had lifted from the ground. Small instruments extended from her equipment harness, scanning, probing, gathering data with mechanical precision. The silence stretched. I became aware of the others watching, waiting for the conclusion I had already decided was inevitable. A failure in the armor. A technical explanation. Something that would restore order to a situation that had briefly slipped beyond it. Kilnara's antennae twitched. That is not what this is, she said quietly. The certainty in her voice cut deeper than I expected. What do you mean? I demanded. She rotated the fragment, bringing it closer to her primary visual receptors. The bonds, she said slowly. They were not broken. I felt a flicker of irritation. Then what happened to them? She hesitated, and for the first time since I had known her, I saw something like uncertainty in her posture. They separated. The word hung there, incomplete, insufficient. Separated, I repeated, trying to force it into a framework that made sense. Under stress. No, she said immediately, more firmly now. Not under stress. There are no stress fractures. No compression patterns. No evidence of impact forces exceeding material tolerance. That was impossible. I turned back toward Iris, searching for something, anything, that might indicate deception, hidden technology, some external factor I had overlooked. She met my gaze calmly. No tension. No defensiveness. Just that same quiet awareness. "What did you do?" I asked. It was not an accusation. It was a question. A genuine one. She considered it for a moment, as if deciding how much to explain. "Nothing complicated," she said. "Just applied force in a very specific way." Very specific. The phrase echoed in my every subtle adjustment in balance. My mind ran through possibilities, scenarios, contingencies. If she moved left, I would pivot right. If she stepped forward, I would disengage and counter. Simple. Controlled. Predictable. I closed the distance to just outside immediate contact range. She did not move. Not a single step. That, more than anything, unsettled me. Most fighters react to proximity. It is instinct, a natural response to an approaching threat. Even the most disciplined warriors show some sign, a tightening of muscles, a shift in stance. She showed nothing. I extended my hand, not striking, just reaching, intending to make controlled contact, to test her reaction speed, her defensive instincts. My fingers were inches from her shoulder. She was not there. No transition. No visible motion. Just absence. A flicker of movement registered at the edge of my perception, too fast to track, and then, her hand touched my forearm. Barely there. And my arm went dead. Not pain. Not impact. Just nothing. The connection between intention and movement vanished instantly, like a system abruptly disconnected. My muscles did not respond. My nerves did not transmit. The limbs simply ceased to function. I stared at it, uncomprehending. What? That was as far as I got. Her other hand tapped my chest. Same pressure as before. Gentle. Controlled. And suddenly breathing became complicated. Not impossible. My lungs expanded, but the air did not seem to register. The rhythm was off, the coordination disrupted. It was as if some essential part of the process had been interrupted, leaving me with the mechanical action but none of the expected result. I stepped back instinctively. Or tried to. My balance faltered. The dead weight of my unresponsive arm pulled me off center, and before I could correct, she moved again. This time I saw it. Not clearly. Not fully. But enough to understand that what I was dealing with was not just speed. It was efficiency. There was no wasted motion. No unnecessary adjustment. Every movement flowed into the next with perfect continuity, each action positioned to create the maximum possible effect with the minimum required effort. Her foot shifted. A subtle change in angle. Her hand brushed against my side. And something in my core tightened abruptly, muscles locking for a fraction of a second too long, disrupting my balance just enough to make recovery difficult. I stumbled. That was all the opening she needed. She stepped in close, closer than any rational combatant would against an opponent of my size, and with a movement so small I almost missed it entirely, she redirected my center of gravity. No force. No shove. Just alignment. And suddenly the ground was not where I expected it to be. I hit the mat hard enough to drive the remaining air from my lungs in a sharp, involuntary exhale. For a moment, everything narrowed to that single sensation, the impact, the disorientation, the struggle to re-establish control over a body that no longer seemed to be responding correctly. By the time my vision cleared, she was standing over me. Not looming. Not threatening. Looking down with that same calm, analytical expression. "You're trying to fight the way you're used to?" she said. I forced air into my lungs, ignoring the lingering disruption in rhythm. "That is generally how fighting works," I managed. A faint hint of a smile touched her lips. "Usually," she agreed. "But you're assuming the rules are the same." I pushed myself up slightly, testing my arm. Sensation was returning, slowly, like a system rebooting after a forced shutdown. "What rules?" I asked. "The ones you've built your entire style around," she replied. "Force, resistance, direct impact. They work. Just not always the way you expect." I frowned, trying to process that. "You're not stronger than me," I said. It was not an accusation. It was an observation. By every measurable metric, mass, muscle density, leverage, I should have had the advantage. She did not argue. "Not in the way you're thinking," she said. That answer was not helpful. "Then how?" I pressed. She crouched slightly, lowering herself to my level. "Humans spend a lot of time figuring out how to make small forces do big things," she said. "Leverage. Timing. Targeting." She reached out, slowly this time, giving me ample opportunity to track the motion. Her fingers touched a point near my shoulder joint. Light pressure. Nothing more. "Here," she said. "This controls a lot of your arm movement." She shifted her hand slightly. "And here, that affects your breathing." Another adjustment. "And here." She tapped a point along my side, the same place she had touched before. "Balance." I stared at her. "You're saying you're not overpowering me," I said slowly. "Interrupting me." "Something like that," she replied. "That did not make it better. If anything, it made it worse. Because overwhelming force is something you can counter. You adapt, you reinforce, you respond with greater force of your own. But this was different. This was precision. This was control at a level I had never encountered before. I pushed myself fully upright, ignoring the lingering instability. "Again," I said. The word came out quieter this time. Less certain, but no less determined. She tilted her head slightly, studying me. "You sure?" she asked. Not even slightly. But that was not the point. "Yes," I said. For a moment, she said nothing. Then she nodded. "All right," she said. "But this time, pay attention." She stepped back, giving me space. I adjusted my stance, more cautious now, more aware of the gaps in my understanding. This was no longer about proving superiority. It was about figuring out how I had been so completely, thoroughly wrong. And somewhere, beneath the confusion, beneath the frustration, beneath the growing realization that I was operating at a disadvantage I did not yet fully comprehend, a new feeling began to take shape. Not confidence. Not exactly. Something sharper. More focused. The beginning of respect. I did not like it, but I could not deny it. Because whatever this human was doing, it was not an accident. And if I was going to survive this training, let alone learn anything from it, I was going to have to start understanding it. Looking back, that was the moment everything should have finally clicked into place. It did not. Understanding, as I would learn, does not arrive all at once. It comes in fragments, pieces that refuse to connect until something forces them together. At the time I had pieces. Strange observations. Impossible outcomes. A growing awareness that I was out of my depth. What I did not have was context. That came later. At the time, all I knew was that I was standing across from a human who had just dismantled both my armor and my assumptions about combat, and I had just asked her to do it again. There is a particular kind of silence that forms when a room full of observers realizes they are no longer watching a demonstration, but something closer to a revelation. The earlier murmurs had faded. Even Kilnara's equipment, which had been emitting a steady stream of analytical chatter, seemed to quiet as if the systems themselves were prioritizing observation over commentary. Everyone was watching, not her. Waiting to see if I had learned anything at all. I adjusted my stance. Slower this time. More deliberate. Every movement measured, every shift in balance carefully considered. If brute force and direct engagement were not the answer, then adaptation had to be. I had faced unfamiliar techniques before. Strange species with unconventional fighting styles. The solution had always been the same. Observe. Adjust. Overcome. I focused on her hands. They had been the point of contact before. The mechanism through which she had disrupted my body and destroyed my armor. If I could track them, predict their movement, I might be able to intercept, to counter before she could establish that same precise contact. A simple plan. Flawed, but I did not know that yet. I moved first. Not a charge this time, but a feint. A forward step combined with a slight shift of my upper body, enough to suggest an attack without committing to it. Her eyes tracked me, but her posture remained unchanged. No reaction. I followed with a real strike, a controlled extension aimed not at impact, but at testing her response window. She moved. I saw it this time. Not clearly, not in the way one sees a normal motion, but as a blur, a distortion in the space she occupied. My strike passed through empty air, and for a fraction of a second, I felt a surge of something dangerously close to triumph. I had anticipated the movement. I pivoted, adjusting mid-action, redirecting into a secondary strike aimed at where she should be based on the trajectory of her displacement. That was when I realized the problem. She was not following predictable trajectories. She was already somewhere else. Something brushed against my wrist. Almost incidental. And suddenly my hand did not close. The strike I had been in the process of completing simply stopped. The muscles responded, but not in the way I commanded. The timing was off. The coordination disrupted just enough to turn a precise motion into something clumsy and ineffective. Before I could compensate, she was inside my reach. Too close. No fighter with any sense closes distance like that against a larger opponent unless they have absolute confidence in what comes next. And why? Her fingers touched a point along my upper arm. Not even a tap. A press. And the strength went out of it. Not entirely, not permanently, but enough. Enough that when I tried to retract, to reset, the movement lacked the force it should have carried. The response lagged, my body no longer operating at the level I was accustomed to. She did not follow with an attack. That was the part that confused me most. She stepped back, gave me space. Let me recover. Again, she said. The word was simple. Instructional. As if we were practicing a basic drill rather than engaging in something that was systematically dismantling my understanding of combat. I took a breath, forcing my lungs to find their rhythm again. This was not a fight. That thought settled in with surprising clarity. This was a lesson, and I was failing it. I adjusted again, shifting my focus. If her hands were the problem, then I needed to control distance. Stay outside immediate contact range. Force her to commit to movement that I could track. Create space, create time, create something predictable in a situation that currently had none. I circled. Slowly. She turned with me, matching the movement without effort, maintaining the same relaxed posture, the same neutral stance that revealed nothing and promised nothing. I feinted left. She did not react. I stepped right, testing. Still nothing. Frustration began to creep in. Not the sharp, immediate kind that drives reckless action, but a slow, persistent irritation at the lack of response. Every tactic I employed was met with the same result. Nothing. No reaction. No engagement. Just observation. You're waiting, I said. She nodded slightly. For what? I demanded. For you to do something that matters, she replied. The answer hit harder than any physical strike. Something that matters. Everything I had done so far, every movement, every adjustment, every attempt to adapt. Irrelevant. I felt the frustration sharpen, pushing against the edges of my control. Then let's make it matter, I said. I committed. Fully this time. No half measures, no testing. A direct advance, faster than before, not reckless but decisive. If she wanted something that mattered, I would give her a situation that required a real response. Distance closed. My strike came in with precision, aimed not at overpowering, but at forcing a reaction she could not ignore. She moved. Of course she did. But this time I saw more. Not the full motion, but the pattern. A shift in weight before the displacement. A subtle change in alignment that preceded the actual movement. Tiny indicators, almost imperceptible, but there. I adjusted mid-strike, compensating, narrowing the margin of error. For a fraction of a second, it felt like I was close. Then she touched my shoulder. And everything stopped. Not physically. Mentally. The moment stretched, awareness collapsing inward as my body failed to respond the way I expected. The connection between thought and action fractured, just enough to create hesitation where there should have been none. That was all she needed. Her foot moved behind mine. Her hand guided, not pushed, just redirected. And the ground disappeared again. I hit the mat harder this time, the impact reverberating through my frame with a force that reminded me very clearly of the difference between controlled training and actual combat. I lay there for a moment, staring up at the ceiling, the pattern of the lighting fixtures blurring slightly as my vision struggled to stabilize. Footsteps approached. She stopped just within my field of view. "You're thinking too much," she said. I let out a slow breath. "That seems unlikely," I replied. "It's not," she said. "You're trying to calculate everything. Predict, analyze, compensate. That works when both sides are playing by the same rules." "And we're not," I said. "No," she agreed. "We're not." I turned my head slightly, looking past her toward the observation area. The faces there were different now. The earlier uncertainty had shifted into something more focused. Less confusion, more recognition. They were starting to understand. Faster than I was. That realization stung more than I expected. "What am I missing?" I asked. The question came out quieter than I intended. Honest. She considered it for a moment. "Your baseline is wrong," she said finally. "Everything you're doing is built on assumptions that don't apply here." "Then give me the correct ones," I said. A hint of that familiar smile returned. "It's not that simple," she replied. "You don't replace." Mind, clashing violently with everything I knew about combat mechanics. Force was measurable, predictable. It followed rules. There were equations, models, established principles that governed how materials responded under pressure. There was no category for very specific that resulted in total structural failure without collateral damage. "You barely touched it," I said. "I did touch it," she corrected gently. The distinction should not have mattered. It did, because somewhere in that simple statement was an implication I was not yet ready to fully grasp. The difference between contact and impact, between pressure and effect. Around us, more trainees had gathered. The earlier amusement was gone, replaced by something quieter, more focused. Even those who had initially dismissed the demonstration were now watching with a level of attention usually reserved for high-level briefings or live combat feeds. The dynamic had shifted. Not completely, but enough. I became acutely aware of my position in the center of the room, partially armored, surrounded by the remains of equipment that had been, moments ago, a symbol of my superiority. The weight of their attention pressed in from all sides, not mocking, not yet, but questioning, measuring. For the first time since I had entered the facility, I felt the need to justify myself. "It was a training exercise," I said more loudly than necessary. "Variables were controlled. The outcome does not reflect." "It reflects exactly what happened," Kilnera interrupted without looking up. The bluntness of it caught me off guard. I turned toward her, ready to respond, to reassert control of the narrative, but the words stalled before they formed. Because as much as I wanted to reject her conclusion, to dismiss it as premature or incomplete, there was an undeniable truth beneath it. It did reflect what happened. And what happened made no sense. Iris stepped forward then, not into a combat stance, not with any sign of aggression, just a simple shift that brought her slightly closer to the center of the mat. "If it helps," she said, addressing the room rather than just me, "most species have the same reaction the first time they see that." Most species. The phrase landed heavily. This was not unique. Not a fluke. Not an isolated incident. "How many times have you done this?" I asked. She tilted her head slightly, considering. "In training," she said. "Or in general?" The fact that there was a distinction between those two contexts did nothing to ease my growing unease. "In training," I clarified. "A few," she replied. "A few." I looked around the room again at the faces, different species, different backgrounds, all of them now sharing the same quiet, unsettled focus. If what she said was true, then somewhere out there were others who had seen this before. Others who had understood it. Which meant the problem was not the event itself. The problem was my understanding of it. That realization settled in slowly, like a weight pressing down on something I had always taken for granted. I had built my entire career on a set of assumptions about combat. About strength, durability, limits. About what was possible and what was not. And in less than a second, a human had demonstrated that those assumptions were incomplete. Not entirely wrong, but incomplete in ways that mattered. I looked down at the fragment of armor still clutched in my hand, turning it over, examining the clean, unnatural separation where there should have been fractures and stress marks. No damage pattern I recognized. No explanation that fit. Just evidence. Cold, undeniable evidence that something about this situation was fundamentally different from anything I had encountered before. I closed my grip around the fragment, feeling its weight, its solidity, the familiar reassurance of something built to endure. And then I looked back at the human who had undone it with a touch. For the first time, the thought occurred to me, quiet, unwelcome, but impossible to ignore. Maybe the problem was not the armor. Maybe the problem was that I did not understand what I was actually facing. And if that was true, then everything I thought I knew about combat was about to be tested in ways I was not prepared for. It was at that moment that I made the decision that would define the rest of my time on Station Helios 9. I chose not to walk away. In retrospect, this was less a display of courage and more a failure of self-preservation instincts, but at the time it felt like the only reasonable course of action. A Kryn warrior does not retreat from something simply because it is difficult to understand. We confront it. We analyze it. We master it. Or, at the very least, we try. Again, I said. The word came out steadier than I felt. Around us, the room shifted, attention sharpening as if a new phase of the demonstration had just been announced. A few of the trainees exchanged glances, the kind that carry unspoken commentary. I ignored them. Iris raised an eyebrow slightly. "You don't have armor," she pointed out. "I am aware," I replied. "That changes things." "It should not," I said, though even as I spoke the words, I knew they lacked conviction. The armor had been my advantage, my assurance against injury, my buffer against the unexpected. Without it, the margin for error narrowed considerably. And yet, something in me insisted that I needed to understand. Not from a distance. Not through analysis or observation. Directly. She studied me for a moment longer, those calm eyes assessing in a way that felt far more precise than any scanning system. "All right," she said finally. "But we adjust the parameters." Parameters? The words sounded clinical, controlled, a reminder that this was supposed to be training, not combat. "First contact still applies," she continued. "But I'll keep it light." I glanced down at the remains of my armor, then back at her. "I would appreciate that," I said. There was a faint shift at the edge of her expression. Not quite amusement, not quite something else. "Trust me," she replied. "You will." We moved back to the center of the mat. This time, I did not rush. The earlier confidence had not vanished entirely, but it had been adjusted. Tempered by the undeniable evidence that my initial assessment had been flawed. I lowered my stance slightly, distributing my weight more carefully, watching her movements with a level of focus I would normally reserve for high-threat opponents. She stood relaxed. Completely relaxed. No guard position. No visible tension. No indication of where she might move or how she might respond. If anything, she looked even less prepared than before. And yet, I knew better now. "Whenever you're ready," she said. I did not charge. Instead, I advanced slowly, testing, probing for any reaction. My eyes tracked every shift in her posture. A baseline. You rebuild it. From the ground up. I stared at her, then at my own hands, flexing them slowly as sensation fully returned. This was not just a difference in technique. It was a difference in fundamentals. In the very foundation of how combat worked. And if that was true, then I was not just outmatched. I was untrained. The thought settled in with a weight that was both humbling and, in a strange way, clarifying. Because if I was untrained, then there was something to learn. I pushed myself up again, slower this time, more deliberate. The room remained silent. Waiting. Watching. I met her gaze. "Again," I said. The word felt different now. Less like a challenge. More like a request. She nodded. And for the first time since this had begun, I understood that what I was facing was not just an opponent. It was an entirely different way of fighting. And I was only just beginning to see it. The explanation did not come as a single revelation. It came as data. Cold, clinical, and far more terrifying than anything I had experienced on a battlefield. By the time the session paused, because even humans, apparently, recognize the value of not completely dismantling a trainee in one continuous sequence, the training facility had transformed into something else entirely. What had started as a demonstration had become an investigation. Kilnera and her team had taken over half the space with scanning arrays, sensor rigs, and enough analytical equipment to map a small star system. Pieces of my armor were laid out in careful arrangements, each fragment tagged, measured, and examined from multiple angles. The air hummed with the quiet intensity of focused research. And at the center of it all was the question: what had actually happened? I stood at the edge of the analysis area, still feeling the lingering aftereffects of our last exchange. My arm had regained full function, my breathing had stabilized, and aside from a growing collection of bruises, I remained intact, which, given the circumstances, felt increasingly like an anomaly. "This is not structural failure," Kilnera said, her voice cutting through the low murmur of activity. "It is not impact damage. It is not energy overload. It is," she paused as if the correct term refused to present itself. "Something else," I finished. She turned one of her primary eyes toward me. "Yes," she said. "Something else." Chief Engineer Vaughn, who had arrived midway through the chaos and immediately declared the situation personally offensive to everything he understood about materials science, was hunched over a holographic display, his thick fingers moving with surprising precision as he manipulated the data. "Look at this," he muttered, projecting an enlarged view of the chest plate fragment. The image rotated slowly, highlighting the area of initial contact. "See the bond lines?" he continued. "They're clean. Too clean. No tearing, no stress gradients, no deformation leading up to the separation point. It's like," he hesitated, then exhaled sharply. "It's like the material just decided to stop being connected." "That is not a thing materials do," someone in the background pointed out. "I am aware," Vaughn snapped. "That is why this is a problem." Kilnera adjusted her sensors, pulling up a layered analysis of the same fragment. "The molecular structure remains intact," she said. "The composition has not changed. There is no evidence of external interference at the chemical level." "Then what caused the separation?" I asked. She hesitated again. "The only consistent variable," she said slowly, "is the point of contact." Every eye in the room shifted. Not to the armor. To the human. Iris stood off to the side, leaning lightly against one of the support columns, watching the proceedings with mild interest. She did not look defensive. She did not look concerned. If anything, she looked patient, as if she had seen this process before. "You're saying," Vaughn said carefully, "that the cause of failure was her." Kilnara's antennae twitched. "I am saying that her interaction with the material coincides exactly with the point of failure," she replied. "Correlation, not causation. But at this stage, it is the only correlation we have." That was not reassuring. Vaughn turned toward Iris. "Lieutenant," he said, his tone shifting into something more formal, "I need you to describe exactly what you did." She pushed off the column and stepped forward, moving with that same effortless ease that now carried a very different weight in my perception. "I touched it," she said. Vaughn stared at her. "Yes," he said slowly. "We are aware of that part. I need more detail." She considered that for a moment. "All right," she said. "I applied force at a specific angle, targeting a structural weak point, and used a rapid transfer of energy to disrupt the integrity of the material." The room went quiet again. "That is not how any of that works," Vaughn said flatly. "It is how this worked," she replied. Kilnara's sensors emitted a series of rapid tones as she processed the statement. "Define rapid transfer of energy," she said. Iris shrugged slightly. "Hard to quantify without your baseline," she said. From my perspective, it wasn't much. That answer did not help. In our baseline, Kilnera pressed, The energy required to produce this level of molecular separation would be equivalent to a focused high-yield detonation. Iris winced slightly. Yeah, she said. That sounds about right. There was a pause. A long one. You are telling me, Vaughn said, each word carefully controlled, that you generated that level of energy with your hand. Yes. No external device. No. No augmentation. No. No visible strain. She paused. I mean, I was trying not to overdo it, she said. The silence that followed that statement was absolute. I felt something shift again. Not confusion this time. Not disbelief. Something heavier. Because there was a difference between something being impossible and something being possible for someone else. Kilnara broke the silence first. Get me biological data on humans, she said, her voice suddenly sharp with urgency. Full physiological profiles. Bone density, muscle composition, neural response times. Everything. One of her assistants hesitated. That will take time, they said. Then start now, she snapped. We are clearly missing critical context. Data began to flow in. At first, it was just numbers. Baseline measurements. Average values. Standard deviations. Then the comparison started. Kilnara pulled up a multi-species chart, overlaying human metrics against known galactic averages. Her antennae went still. That cannot be correct, she said. What? I asked. She rotated the display toward us. Bone density, she said. Humans average approximately 3 times the density of Kryn's skeletal structures. I frowned. That is not possible, I said. Their frames are smaller. Less mass. Density is not mass, she replied. It is composition. Vaughn leaned closer to the display. Run the muscle data, he said. Kilnara complied. The results appeared. Muscle fiber efficiency, she read, her voice slowing. Force output per unit mass significantly exceeds predicted values. Fiber layering optimized for both endurance and explosive strength. Optimized. I repeated. She did not answer immediately. Instead, she pulled up another dataset. Neural response time, she said. Reaction speed, faster than Kryn by a measurable margin. Not drastically, but enough to matter in close engagement. That explains the movement, I said quietly. Partially, she replied. More data populated the screen. Environmental factors. Planetary conditions. Kilnara's posture changed. Subtly, but unmistakably. What is it? First, she did not look away from the display. Gravity, she said. The word seemed innocuous. It was not. Earth's gravity, she continued, is rated at approximately 0.98 galactic standard. That is within acceptable range, Vaughn said. Slightly below average, but not. For us, Kilnara interrupted. Yes. She zoomed in on the comparative chart. For them, she said, it is baseline. I felt a slow, creeping realization begin to form. Explain, I said. She turned to face me fully now. Every human you see, she said, has evolved, developed, and trained under that gravitational constant. Their muscles, their bones, their entire physiology is calibrated for that level of resistance. I nodded slowly. And here? I asked. She adjusted the display again. Station Helios 9 operates at 0.7 standard. The implication hit me all at once. They are stronger here, I said. Yes. Faster. Yes. More efficient. Yes. Vaughn exhaled sharply. So we've essentially taken a species adapted to higher resistance, he said, and placed them in an environment where that resistance is reduced. Kilnara's antennae dipped slightly. Correct. I looked back at Iris. She met my gaze. Unchanged. How much stronger? I asked. She tilted her head slightly. Depends on the individual, she said. But generally? She paused. Enough. That was not a number. It did not need to be. Because standing there, surrounded by data that systematically dismantled every assumption I had made about her species, I began to understand something that went far beyond a single demonstration. This was not an anomaly. This was not a rare individual with unusual capabilities. This was baseline. Every human on this station, every single one, was operating under conditions that enhanced their natural abilities beyond what the rest of us considered normal. And they had integrated into our systems, our training programs, our command structures, without making that fact widely understood. Why wasn't this flagged? Vaughn demanded, turning back to the data. This should have been classified, monitored. It was not considered a risk factor, Kilnera said. Gravity variance within this range is generally negligible. For most species, he snapped. She did not respond. Because there was nothing to say. I looked at Iris again. You knew, I said. It was not an accusation. Just a statement. She shrugged slightly. We had a general idea, she said. Didn't realize how big the gap was until we started training with you. Training. The word felt different now. Less like instruction. More like demonstration. Of what they could do. Of what we could not. And you've been holding back, I said. She did not answer immediately. Then, slowly she nodded. Yes, she said. I felt that same weight settle again. Heavier this time. Because it was one thing to be outmatched. It was another to realize that the opponent had been deliberately limiting themselves. By how much? I asked. She hesitated. Not out of uncertainty. Out of consideration. Enough that you're still standing, she said. That was when the last piece fell into place. Not fully. Not completely. But enough. Enough to understand that what I had experienced so far was not the limit. Not even close. And for the first time since this had begun, the question that formed in my mind was not about how she had done it. It was about what would happen if she stopped holding back. I should have stopped there. Any reasonable being, presented with that level of information, that degree of disadvantage, that clear and overwhelming gap in capability, would have made the logical choice. Withdraw. Recess. Request reassignment to a safer, more predictable environment where the laws of physics behaved in a way that did not actively undermine your understanding of reality. That would have been the correct decision. It was not the one I made. Schedule another session, I said. The words left my mouth with a certainty that surprised even me. Kilnera froze mid-analysis. I am sorry, she said slowly, her translator rendering each word with deliberate precision. Did you just volunteer for additional exposure to the phenomenon that destroyed your armor and temporarily disabled your nervous system? Yes. There was a pause. A long one. Around us, the room seemed to collectively reconsider my mental stability. That is, Vaughn began, then stopped, then tried again. That is not what I would describe as a strategically sound decision. It is training, I replied. It is not training, Kilnera countered immediately. It is controlled demolition with educational side effects. I ignored that, because there was something else forming beneath the surface of my thoughts. Something that had nothing to do with pride and everything to do with clarity. If this is what humans are capable of, I said, gesturing vaguely toward the data displays, then every combat model we use is incomplete. No one argued. Every engagement scenario, every predictive algorithm, every tactical assumption, I continued, the realization sharpening as I spoke. They all assume a baseline that does not account for this. I looked directly at Kilnera. You said it yourself. We were missing context. Her antennae twitched. Yes, she admitted. Then I need that context, I said. You need to survive, Vaughn muttered. That too. There was another silence. Different this time. Less disbelief. More reluctant consideration. Because beneath the questionable judgment, there was logic. Flawed, dangerous logic, but logic nonetheless. If you proceed, Kilnera said carefully, we will need to implement full monitoring protocols. Biometric tracking. Impact analysis. Emergency response readiness. You were already doing that, I pointed out. Not at the level this will require, she replied. I inclined my head slightly. Then adjust accordingly. She stared at me for a moment longer, then made a series of rapid inputs on her console. "Fine," she said. "But I am documenting this as a voluntary high-risk exposure." Noted that I turned toward Iris. She had been watching the exchange quietly, her expression unreadable. "You heard that?" I asked. "I did." "And?" She considered me for a moment. "You're serious?" she said. "Yes." "That's unusual," she admitted. "For my species?" "For most species," she corrected. That was not comforting. "Will you do it?" I asked. She exhaled slowly, running a hand through her hair in a gesture that seemed almost humanly casual, if that distinction still meant anything. "I will," she said. "But we changed the format." "Explain." "No more demonstrations," she replied. "No more surprises. If we're doing this, we do it properly." "Properly," I repeated. "Structured training," she said. "Controlled escalation. You learn the fundamentals before we push into anything advanced." That sounded reasonable, which, given everything that had happened so far, made me immediately suspicious. "And if I request otherwise?" I asked. She smiled slightly. "Then I remind you that I'm the instructor," she said. "When do we start?" I asked. She glanced at the time display on the wall. "I have another session in 20 minutes, she said. "After that, I can fit you in." 20 minutes. A small window. Not enough time to fully process what I had just committed to. More than enough time for doubt to begin forming. I nodded. "I will be ready." "I'm sure you will," she said. There was something in her tone. Not mocking. Not dismissive. Just certain. As if she already knew how this was going to go. That realization stayed with me as I left the training facility, the noise of analysis and discussion fading behind me. The corridor outside felt quieter, colder. Or perhaps that was just my perception adjusting. Grum fell into step beside me, his massive frame moving with an unusual lack of confidence. "This is a mistake," he rumbled. "You mentioned that earlier," I replied. "And you ignored me earlier," he said. "I am repeating it in case your decision-making process has improved." "It has not." He made a low sound that I chose to interpret as frustration. "You are not prepared for this," he continued. "Correct. You do not understand what you are facing." "Also correct. You have already been defeated twice in under a minute." "Technically, yes." He stopped walking. I took another step before realizing he was no longer beside me and turned back. He was staring at me. "Then explain to me," he said, his voice dropping slightly, "why you are going back." The question lingered in the space between us. It deserved a better answer than the one I initially considered. Because it was not just pride. Not entirely. "If what we saw in there is accurate," I said slowly, "then humans are not just another species in the council." "That is obvious," he said. "No," I replied. "It is not obvious. It is fundamental." He said nothing. Waiting. "We have built our entire understanding of combat around a shared baseline," I continued. "Relative strength. Comparable limitations. Predictable responses. And humans break that," he said. "Yes." I met his gaze. "So either we ignore that fact and hope it never becomes relevant. Or we learn." He exhaled slowly. "And you think you are the one who should do that learning?" "I am the one who is here," I said. "That is not an answer." "It is the only one I have." He studied me for a long moment. Then, finally, he nodded. "Then I will watch," he said. "Watch?" "Yes," he replied. "Because if you are about to do something this foolish, I would prefer to witness the outcome personally." That is reassuring. It is not meant to be. We resumed walking. The medical bay was only a short distance away, and I spent most of the time in silence, running through everything I had learned, everything I had experienced, trying to assemble it into something coherent. It did not come together cleanly. There were too many gaps. Too many unknowns. But there was a pattern. Humans were stronger. Faster. More precise. Not because of technology. Not because of augmentation. Because of how they had evolved. And because of where they came from. A death world. The term surfaced from memory, pulled from old briefings and classification systems that most of us had never needed to take seriously. Worlds too hostile for intelligent life. Environments that crushed, burned, or poisoned anything that attempted to thrive there. Earth had passed the basic requirements for council admission. Atmosphere, radiation, chemical stability. No one had considered gravity as a primary factor. No one had considered what kind of life would evolve under those conditions. We had seen them. Unarmored. Apparently fragile. And we had assumed. That was the mistake. By the time I reached the medical bay, the initial shock had settled into something more focused. Not fear. Not exactly. Awareness. A clear understanding that I was about to step into a situation where every advantage I had relied on no longer applied. Where the rules were different. Where the margin for error was effectively non-existent. And I was choosing to do it anyway. The medic on duty scanned me, confirmed that nothing was permanently damaged, and suggested, in a tone that implied she expected to see me again very soon, that I avoid unnecessary high-impact training scenarios for the remainder of the cycle. I acknowledged the recommendation, then ignored it, because 20 minutes later I was back at the training facility. And this time, I knew enough to be concerned. The observation area was already filling. Word had spread, not just about what had happened earlier, but about what was about to happen next. A rematch. That was how they were framing it. They were wrong. This was not a rematch. It was something else entirely. Something I was only just beginning to understand. I stepped onto the mat. No armor. No advantage. Just me. And across from me, a human who had been holding back. Iris walked in a moment later, right on schedule. Same uniform. Same posture. Same calm, controlled presence. She looked at me, then at the growing crowd, then back at me. Ready? She asked. Not even close. But that was not the answer she was looking for. Yes, I said. She nodded once. Then stepped forward. And for reasons I could not fully explain, every instinct I had was telling me that this time would be worse. The crowd was larger this time. Not just trainees and off-duty personnel, but specialists, analysts, even a few command-level observers who had no business attending a routine training session unless that session had stopped being routine. They filled the observation gallery, pressed against the transparent barrier, voices low, movements restrained. Not excitement. Anticipation. The bedding had changed. I could hear it in fragments as I took my position on the mat. 10 seconds. 5. Under. Medical intervention required, guaranteed. No one was betting on my victory. Not a single voice. Strangely, that helped. Expectation is a weight. When it disappears, so does the pressure to meet it. What remained was simpler. Cleaner. Survive. If possible, improve. I rolled my shoulders, testing the lingering stiffness. My body responded, slower than usual, but functional. Good enough. Across from me, Iris stood with the same relaxed posture as before, but there was a difference now. Subtle. Easy to miss. But after everything I had experienced, impossible to ignore. She was focused. Not casually attentive. Not passively observant. Focused. On me. That alone told me more than anything she could have said. All right, she said, her voice carrying just enough to reach the edge of the gallery. We're doing this properly. A few of the observers shifted. Kilnara's equipment lit up again, sensor arrays adjusting, recalibrating for what I suspected would be significantly more data than before. 3-minute round, Iris continued. Controlled contact. You call stop, we stop. I call stop, we stop. I nodded. Structured. In theory. I'll match your intensity, she added. That line settled into my mind with quiet weight. Match your intensity. Which meant she was still holding back. Still adjusting. Still operating below whatever her actual limit was. I forced that thought aside. It was not useful. Ready? She asked. I lowered my stance slightly. Focused. This time I would not rush. This time I would watch. Yes. She nodded once. Go. I moved. Not forward. Sideways. A slow lateral shift, testing distance, testing her response to nonlinear movement. If direct engagement failed, then angles mattered. Positioning mattered. She turned with me. Effortlessly. No lag. No adjustment period. Just alignment. I changed direction. Faster this time. She matched it. Not chasing. Not reacting. Just that. Always where she needed to be. I felt the first flicker of frustration. Not because she was faster. Because she was efficient. There was no wasted motion to exploit. No openings created by overextension. No patterns I could immediately recognize. So I created one. I stepped in sharply, committing to a forward advance, then broke off halfway, shifting into a low-angle approach designed to draw her into a response. Her weight shifted. I saw it. A fraction of a second before she moved, her center adjusted. A subtle redistribution that telegraphed intent, not to someone untrained, but to someone looking for it. I moved to intercept. For the first time, I was almost in the right place. My hand came within striking distance. Closer than before. Close enough that I could feel the air displacement as she moved. Then she wasn't there. But this time, I understood something I hadn't before. She wasn't just faster. She was earlier. Her movement didn't react to mine. It preceded it. She was reading intent. Acting before action. That realization hit just as her hand touched my wrist. Controlled. And the strength drained out of it. Not fully. Not completely. But enough. Enough to disrupt the motion. Enough to turn precision into error. I adjusted, pulling back, compensating, shifting my weight to maintain balance. Her foot tapped my ankle. Not hard. Not enough to trip. Just enough to shift alignment. My center drifted. A few centimeters. That was all it took. Her hand pressed lightly against my shoulder. And suddenly the ground was no longer where it was supposed to be. I hit the mat. Not as hard as before. Not catastrophic. But decisive. The air left my lungs in a sharp burst, vision narrowing for a fraction of a second before stabilizing. I rolled, instinctively creating distance, pushing myself back to my feet before she could capitalize. She didn't follow. Didn't press. She stepped back. Gave me space. Better, she said. I blinked. Better. I repeated. You saw the shift, she said. You moved to intercept. I processed that. She was right. I had seen it. Too slow. Too late. But I had seen it. That was intentional? I asked. She shrugged slightly. I didn't hide it, she said. Not the same thing. Not even close. But it meant something. It meant there was a path. Narrow. Difficult. But real. I reset my stance. Breathing steady. Focus sharpening. This wasn't about winning. That was no longer a relevant objective. This was about understanding. About closing the gap. Even slightly. Again, I said. She nodded. This time she moved first. And everything changed. There is a difference between reacting to an opponent and being forced to react. When she initiated, the pace shifted instantly. The controlled environment, the measured exchanges, the illusion of balance, it all vanished. She stepped in. Not the blur I had perceived before. Something clearer. More defined. Because I was looking for it. Her hand came toward my upper frame. Not a strike. A placement. I intercepted. Barely. My forearm met hers, redirecting the contact just enough to prevent the exact point she had targeted. For a fraction of a second. We were connected. Solid. The first time. A surge of something sharp and electric moved through me. Not victory. But confirmation. She was tangible. Not untouchable. Not beyond reach. Just beyond me. For now. Her eyes shifted. Not surprised. Not alarmed. Acknowledging. Then she adjusted. Her wrist rotated. A small motion. Almost nothing. And suddenly my interception became a liability. My arm turned. My balance shifted. My center opened. Her other hand tapped my chest. Controlled. And my lungs forgot how to function again. I staggered back. Tried to recover. Her foot moved. My leg buckled. And then, the world flipped. Not violently. Not chaotically. Precisely. The mat met my back with controlled finality, my body hitting just hard enough to end the exchange without causing real damage. I lay there, staring up again, breath slowly returning, mind racing to process everything that had just happened. Faster this time. Cleaner. More information. More understanding. And one undeniable truth. I was improving. Slightly. Marginally. But enough to notice. Footsteps approached. She stopped just within view. For seconds, she said. I closed my eyes briefly. For consistent. Reliable. Predictable. For her. I opened them again. That's not better, I said. It is, she replied. You lasted 4 seconds against active engagement instead of passive. That was technically true. I let out a slow breath. That's a very low bar, I muttered. She smiled slightly. It's the first one, she said. I considered that. Then, despite everything, a small, reluctant realization settled in. She wasn't mocking me. She was teaching. This wasn't humiliation. It was calibration. Again, I said. The word came easier now. Less resistance. More intent. She studied me for a moment. Then nodded. Again, she agreed. And somewhere in the observation gallery, I could hear the shift. Not in volume. In tone. They were no longer watching for how quickly I would fall. They were watching to see if I could learn before I did. The third round did not begin with movement. It began with silence. Not the kind that comes from hesitation, but the kind that settles when both participants understand the shape of the exchange before it happens. The crowd had gone still again, but it was different now. Less anticipation. More scrutiny. They were no longer watching a mismatch. They were watching adaptation. I adjusted my stance, but only slightly. The overcorrection from earlier rounds was gone. No exaggerated caution. No forced speed. Just balance. Iris noticed immediately. Her head tilted a fraction. That small movement told me everything. She had seen the change. Better control, she said. Not praise. Observation. I nodded once. I am compensating, I replied. You're learning, she corrected. The distinction mattered. Compensation implied survival. Learning implied progression. I did not respond, because she was already moving. No announcement this time. No clear initiation. Just transition. One moment she was still. The next she wasn't. But I was ready for that now. Not fully. Not perfectly. But enough. I tracked the shift in her weight before motion completed. Not the movement itself, the intent behind it. A subtle redistribution through her feet, the alignment of her shoulders, the fraction of breath that preceded action. I moved before she arrived. For the first time, I did not react to her. I intersected her path. My hand met her forearm. Sustained for more than an instant. The gallery reacted. A sound rose, subtle, involuntary. Surprise leaking through controlled observation. But I did not look at them. Because everything in that moment was Iris. Her expression did not change. Not surprised. Not impressed. Just acknowledging. Then she rotated. Not away. Through. My grip failed immediately. Not because of force. Because of structure. My hold had no leverage. No anchor point. She turned the contact into a pivot, and suddenly my control was not control at all. It was alignment in her favor. My balance shifted again. I corrected. Too slow. Her foot touched my knee. Not enough to damage. Enough to compromise stance. My center dropped. Not fully. Not catastrophically. But enough. Her hand tapped my side. And my torso forgot the direction it was meant to hold. I stumbled. Recovered half a step later. But that half step was all she needed. She stepped back immediately. No follow-up. No finishing motion. Just reset. Good, she said. The word landed heavier than it should have. I steadied my breathing. That was intentional, I said. Yes, she replied. You allowed contact. I allowed understanding, she corrected. That distinction again. I hated how precise it was. I exhaled slowly. I am beginning to see patterns, I said. Good, she repeated. Then added, don't rely on them yet. That warning mattered more than the praise. I reset my stance. This time, something had changed internally. Not confidence. Not comfort. Awareness. Because I had touched her. Not metaphorically. Not theoretically. Physically. And she had still controlled the outcome. But now I knew something concrete. She was not invulnerable. She was not untouchable. She was simply efficient at converting contact into advantage. Which meant contact itself was not enough. It had to be meaningful. Again, I said. She raised an eyebrow slightly. You're accelerating, she observed. I am adapting, I corrected. A faint hint of approval crossed her expression. Good, she said. Then she moved again. This time, slower. Not in speed. In readability. It was deliberate. She wanted me to see more. I did. Her approach was no longer a blur. It was a sequence. Weight shift. Hip rotation. Shoulder alignment. Step placement. I tracked it. All of it. And for a fraction of a second, I understood where she would be. I moved. Not to meet her. To arrive before her. Our hands met midair. This time, I did not lose immediately. I adjusted grip, attempting to stabilize contact, to anchor her movement. It held. For half a second. Then she exhaled. A small thing. Almost nothing. And my entire structure collapsed. Not my grip. Not my arm. My assumption. She was not resisting me. She was redirecting the conditions under which resistance mattered. My stance broke. She stepped in. Not fast. Just correct. Her shoulder touched my chest. And my balance ceased to exist. I fell. Controlled. Predictable. Matt met me again. But this time, I stayed down for a moment longer. Not from damage. From thought. Above me, she stepped back. No stop, she asked. I shook my head. No, I said. There was a pause. Then she nodded. Good, she said. And for the first time, I realized something important. She was not increasing difficulty. She was reducing ignorance. Each round was not harder than the last. It was clear. And that clarity was far more dangerous than strength. I pushed myself up slowly. My body was learning. But more importantly, so was I. Again, I said. And this time, even I noticed the shift. Not in her. In me.